don't know how this plays out, but I think we're going to enter a world where creators are selling their likeness as opposed to their real, actual selves.
First movers get all the advantages, early movers get some of the advantages, everybody thereafter is just late to the party.
Welcome to the party, pal!
I get my news from podcasting. I didn't used to. By definition, young people trust it more because they're making the choices.
I don't know if that's true. My belief is that I think the world has a bigger problem with hypocrisy. There has to be a better way. Then, where I think it gets really interesting is in this week's Memes and Machines, we talk about being the bad guy. Why brands that are willing to steer into adversity often get advantages. We do a breakdown of Ryanair and what is effective about their social marketing. We talk about morality. Is the industry hypocritical for demonizing certain sectors and not others? Tough question. Out of phone. The next wave of out of home, clever play on words from TikTok in a new partnership. We explore podcasting and more specifically why young people trust podcasts over everything else. AI avatars. What does this mean for the future of marketing? And finally, we debate an age-old topic. What is more important, content or context?
And how we are heading headfirst into a dystopian AI future.
Don't say that, Catty. You're going to ruin the podcast. This was a positive one. Dude, Catman, good to see you. How are you?
Doing well, man. Doing well. Enjoying autumn in New York City. How about you?
Autumn in New York. I'm sure they write songs about that, or they should. I am okay. I've recovered. So yesterday, I am currently in LA. Yesterday, I was in Vegas and I missed my flight. Not in any really interesting story. I showed up to the airport on time. There was a huge queue. By the time I went to check in my bag, got to the counter and the computer said no. I was apparently 3 minutes after the cutoff. And then they sent me to another queue. Bearing in mind, I'm going to call out this airline, Spirit, because I think there's an interesting narrative here about companies that just are quite happy to have terrible customer service, but they compete on price. That's all they compete on as a company. You know, the customer's not always right. They just compete, and Spirit embodies this. And for anyone that isn't aware, Spirit is the Ryanair equivalent in the US, but I'm going to say way worse. My experiences on Ryanair have been considerably better than my experiences on Spirit. So anyway, I go through multiple counters. They keep sending me to the next person to eventually just say, yeah, you're just going to have to pay for another flight. Yet there are no flights. Eventually, I spoke to a supervisor, managed to get on the final flight of the day. So my plans yesterday were messed up. But you turn lemons into lemonade, and I sat in the sun, which I can't complain about, considering when I go back home to the UK, there will be no sun. So all in all, today is a brighter day.
And you made it.
And I made it. That's the important thing. Dude, on that topic, let's kick off with something. Let's talk airlines. Ryanair. Ryanair are known for doing irreverent marketing. It's long been their playbook to do bold PR stunts, steer into controversy. They seem to be winning on social media too. Give me your take. What do you think of Ryanair, and what do you think's interesting about their marketing strategy?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. They're winning on social media, and they do all the kind of baseline principles right. They're very quick to new platforms. They were one of the first brands to really dominate TikTok. And gained huge amount of reach on there. They've done an equally good job finding their tone of voice on Twitter. But what Ryanair do differently to pretty much any other brand, which I love, is they lean heavily into the most negative things about their product. And they actually view the negative things of their product as a feature rather than a bug. And so when you think about low cost products traditionally, fast food, for example, you think about fast food marketing, most of the time, the marketing is spending a lot of time and energy trying to make that product look premium. They'll show how the chickens are raised in nice farms and how the lettuce is sourced and how it's all cooked and prepared in their pristine kitchens. And it's designed to make you feel like I'm having a premium product and paying a low cost. Ryanair, on the other hand, they know that you are shopping with them for one reason, and that is to save money. And the fact that you can't move your feet, the fact that you have to pay €5 to use the bathroom, the fact that you can't store your bag above the hold without paying ridiculous premium, they don't hide that. They shout about that. They celebrate the fact that people hate that. And they realize, and they've learned that there's no point shying away from these things because actually people see it as part of the experience. When they're flying, they just want to get from A to B. And as a result, they've kind of hacked social engagement by being one of those brands that are unashamedly themselves. They really own their product, and they aren't ashamed and they aren't afraid of, vocalizing all of the bad things about the experience, but actually that people deep down love. And I think there's a lot that kind of these low-cost products can learn from, that to ask themselves, why are customers actually shopping with us? Why are they actually using us? And let's just be ourselves.
I love that. I remember watching an interview with the CEO, and they were asked, is it true that you were going to charge for using the bathroom? And he went, absolutely true. He said, but not for the reason most people think. He said, we believed if we started charging for the bathrooms, people would use the bathroom less, so we could get rid of the back cubicles and put in 6 extra seats. So it was super logical, but you're right. There is something very admirable about being authentic, not working through the veneer that most brands do and try and portray themselves in the world in a certain way. It reminds me a little bit of I'm going to give you a WWE reference. It reminds me of this idea that, when everyone's trying to be the good guy, you're trying to be the liked person. Sometimes you should just play the heel. People don't want to be disliked. And you see it in big public personas. Let's say Piers Morgan, Katie Hopkins, Trump, these people that are wildly disliked, they're competing in a space that's much less congested. They don't mind being the bad person. Yet we all want to be liked and loved. That's safer space, but much harder to compete in. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned. What have you seen on their social media specifically? You said they're winning on social. What have you seen that you think is particularly clever, other than tone of voice, personality, willing to be the, steer into their negative traits as a brand?
They're great at responding to people who are posting about them and creating content out of their kind of user-generated content that gets posted at them. What I mean by that is that people will, they'll make it like a complaint, or they'll throw some kind of like funny joke, again, like I said, that highlights bad legroom or some kind of, compromise they've made on their travel. And they will highlight it. They will make a joke about it. They will create some meme out of it. And what that does is it just kind of creates this loop where everybody else wants to do it. They see somebody else getting a quote tweet from Ryanair, and they think, oh, I want a quote tweet from Ryanair. And now their feed is just full of people tweeting at Ryanair saying, they have, like, for example, they have a famous seat, the 11A seat, which I think is like the smallest leg room or doesn't have a window. It's like no one wants the 11A seat. And then you have all these people tweeting at Ryanair saying, oh, I got the 11A seat. And then they'll quote tweet it with something like, you shouldn't look this happy, like it's not a good seat. And it's just like they've created this like very two-way relationship with their audience where you've now got these like fans who are willing to post about every single Ryanair flight they take. And it's just this really smart way of breaking down that barrier between brand and customer.
My favorite version of that was them responding to someone. They said something about flights being boring, and they just said, what about your in-flight entertainment? And it's just the safety guide
exactly
stuck to the front seat. I was like, oh, that's genius. You're right. The self-deprecating nature, It's although they're not British, I'm going to say it's a very Britishism, right? It reminds me of the kind of rate my meal where you encourage. But I think there's a broader point you're making about brands having first being encouraging certain behaviors of their audience. I'm the biggest believer that one of the simplest pillars that brands can deploy in their social media strategy is brand love. So if you champion positive reviews or nice things said about you online, you reshare them or recreate them, that's the simplest way to show your audience that you're going to amplify their voice. I think Ryanair have taken it a step further, but I think all brands universally can listen online, identify, don't ignore people who say nice things, and amplify. And I think that's one of the 0 to 1 methods to get some actual engagement on social in a meaningful way.
Yep. Yeah, 100% right.
Dude, I want to segue because I think I've been thinking about this for a couple of weeks, and one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast with you was to have very honest dialogues, and it sometimes means confronting conversations that are either challenging or less spoken about. And there's something that I keep coming up against, and I've just written the word morality in marketing. And what I mean by that, I read an article a couple of weeks ago, and it was basically Havas had been attacked for winning the Shell account. And what the criticisms of them are this erodes any good they are doing against any of their social good or their ESG work or working with more sustainable brands. They were being called out for being hypocrites. And part of me just goes, as much as I think the advertising industry has a role to play in being a moral and ethical voice, I just think there's just so much hypocrisy in that criticism. So are we going to start saying advertising companies don't work with airlines, don't work with car manufacturers? If you looked at the net contribution of both of those industries, it would be greater than that of the oil. Like the world is built in a way where we have to function. And we used to get this a lot, whereby we would have certain categories that it was often felt we shouldn't have a voice in or participate in. And that's okay. I think everyone has a boundary. But it would always seem hypocritical, because when I looked at the spectrum of sins, we used to work with betting companies. We would work with alcohol brands, So how do you feel about marketeers being almost moral arbiters of work? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Should we be having these debates? What do you think?
I think we should definitely be having these debates. Advertising is hugely influential and can basically shape the way a nation thinks if it's done well. And so as a result, there is some obligation to be, driving messages which are positive and not, pushing products which are damaging or which could potentially, endanger people, for example. There's obviously like a scale there to measure. It feels like the closer the company is to the
sin,
the worse. So like Shell are, literally getting the oil out the ground, and therefore they're bad. But then once you're a few steps removed and you're just putting the oil into your, vehicle and driving it, it's okay. Again, I think you're right. There's this kind of loose
double standard
spectrum. Yeah, exactly. But I think what needs to happen is, especially with big agencies, they need to be very clear on what their beliefs and what their ethical guidelines are, because I think that the people who are joining those companies they have the right to choose what they work on and which messages they push. I completely sympathize with people who don't want to advertise electric cigarettes when there are children in the US getting addicted to them. completely fair that people might not want to work on an account which pushes that. And I think there is some responsibility for like the founders and the agencies to be clear on what their missions are and you know, which products they are willing to push. But I don't think people should make decisions for the whole industry, because everybody's very different, and again, different cultures have different you know, different beliefs and different like levels of obligation as well. So it's a difficult one.
Yeah, you're right in the sense that advertising is incredibly influential, and I would like to think that most in the industry have a responsible voice. However, I often see, so a common thing that happens in Adland is sub-agencies or separate companies are set up to service particular accounts. So to a team, you know, you may say, we are not going to work with big tobacco. We're a big activation agency, and we're not going to work on vaping, as you say. But what a lot of these leading agencies will do, will just set up a shell company that ends up just servicing that account and never talking about that work. So my belief is that I think the world has a bigger problem with hypocrisy. So, for example, and I don't know much about Havas's efforts or their commitment to social responsibility and environmental issues. However, I would assume if they've faced a lot of backlash, they've probably been proactive in communicating a certain persona or a certain client profile. And I think the reality is the hypocrisy that exists in advertising is probably an opportunity for a lot of agency partners. We invested in a company called Nuevo, and Jack's, their founder, their whole purpose for being built was to do carbon positive creative productions, because he observed the hypocrisy that existed between these sustainable brands that would go out and send 50 people to a remote location, use generators and, you know, create just for this one piece of content, this 30-second piece of content. And there has to be a better way. So he built a team of people that understood how to do a better way. So I think in the hypocrisy, there's probably opportunity. But yeah, that's the bit that unsettles with me. It's a complex issue, like most things. I don't think it's as binary as we probably like to, or our initial reactions to any news tends to make us believe, you know?
Indeed.
Dude, I saw a phrase that I loved, and it came from TikTok. It was called out of phone. A beautiful play on out of home. Effectively, TikTok had partnered with a provider to showcase TikTok ads out in the wild, in the world. I thought it was great. Something that we have talked about a lot historically. I often think it's very effective to use social first content in the real world. You will see tweets or you will see group chats that are placed on a billboard, and they are highly effective. Do you believe that as the real world and social world continue to conflate, do you think these formats will become less effective, social in the real world? Or do you just think we're just going to see more entertaining ads out in the wild?
It feels like any format, they're going to become tired eventually. I remember when Twitter first started doing their campaign where they ran basically tweets across like out of home subways. It felt new, it felt different, and it caught my eye, and everyone was taking pictures of it. I think I see them now, and again, it does feel a little bit tired. I think that's just like any trending format. What I think these ads are really powerful for is, and why I think they're really attractive to brands, is that easy creative, right? It's like it's doing the hard bit for them, and they also have the benefit of knowing that it's a piece of content that resonates. They can see the data, they can see the engagement figures. They therefore know that this is a piece of content that has already gone through the test of, will people find this interesting? And then, okay, we can just run it as an out-of-home ad, and it will, it will immediately hit. But I think the more interesting thing, the brands who are going to really benefit from this are going to be the ones who understand how to take a piece of social content, whether it's organic, whether it's something they've made, how to take a piece of social content that's got a lot of traction and, has therefore indicated to them that this is a piece of content that's worth distributing. How do they then make that something bigger? How do they turn it into a campaign? How do they develop the content? Instead of just screenshotting it and putting it on a billboard, how do I bring this to life a bit more? Because I think, like I said, this whole idea is great at qualifying content, telling you this is something that people will engage with. But then the creative work should still be done by the brand. There should still be some development beyond that.
Yeah, there are two parts to that, aren't there? There's the underlying message that there are diminishing returns over time. First movers get all the advantages. Early movers get some of the advantages. Everybody thereafter is just late to the party. I think that's definitely part of the story. Although I would say, if I think of 90% of the things and billboards that I see out in the wild, they're not very interesting. They're dull. They're useless. So would I favor more entertaining content in the world? Sure. I still think there's a long way to go before we diminish the point of return or diminish the efficacy. And then the second point there is the fact that you now can qualify if something's going to work online, and suddenly you can then figure out, the likelihood is lots of people will like it. I think that's smart business. One of the things I don't think is done enough in advertising is licensing viral content and using that front and center of your advertising. I think whether that's digital advertising more broadly, whether that's specifically social media advertising, or whether that's out of home, I think there's still a lot of merit in licensing great content. I go back probably maybe a year or two ago, and what brands started to do very well, instead of just doing the easy thing, which was license the original content, which they could do, they would take the content creator and recreate a version with their brand in it. So I think that's the elevator, that's the two worlds meeting. I was thinking of the guy that was famed for doing the dancing in the car. He would get out of the car and he would just like dance and roll back. And it may have been ASOS. Was it ASOS that did that? You know which ad I mean? It's basically, he gets out of the car, he's dancing, and the car's rolling, still moving. He went viral for that.
Saturday, Sunday.
I think it was ASOS.
Yeah, I think it was ASOS.
There we go. Good advertising. We're a year and a half ago and we're still reminiscing. It proves that ads fade though, because I'm going, I can't remember who it was, but it was cool at the time, right?
But ASOS won. They took the brand equity from it.
They did. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned in just that simple take, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a good reminder that, lo-fi production often beats the $1 million shoots these days. Like, people want to see content from other people. I think that's what social media is driving even harder.
I don't know if that's true, that lo-fi beats. I think what I believe to be true is that the risk reward is I think people will favor exceptional creative, and it will be more memorable. It will be less hygiene. It'll be less throwaway. I'm much more likely to remember something that left me feeling something. It's very hard to achieve the same with kind of these like throwaway laughs. You go, that's funny, that's cute, that's entertaining. That's not the same to me as kind of like deeply emotional. So I do believe there's a role, but when I just think of how much poor or void of emotion advertising there is in the world, a better strategy for the majority is just do the lower barrier to entry, authentic, genuine. I think do that consistently and you'd have a better chance of winning.
Yeah, agreed.
I read a report from Spotify, surprisingly about podcasting, And it was really interesting. It was very pro podcasting, as you would expect. One of the stats that stood out to me, nearly 2/3 of Zs in the UK, 64%, Zs being young folk, Gen Zers, they believe that podcasting is more trustworthy than any other form of media because it's more representative of diverse voices and points of view. Why do young people trust podcasting that, certainly doesn't go through the journalist or doesn't have the journalistic pedigree that maybe media has? I could say something to you right now that is absolute nonsense and say it with conviction, and maybe someone would believe me. Why do young people trust podcasts more than the media?
There's a couple of reasons. It's very unfiltered. There just is less editing by definition on podcasting. So as a result, you just have these more authentic dialogues, and you can't hide behind pretty editing or jump cuts. It's like pretty close to what the point we're trying to make is. But I think also the bigger point in my mind is that the podcasts that young people choose haven't been served to them by an algorithm. So every other social platform, they're being given content on a plate based on an arbitrary set of inputs that could be the content they consume, or it could be their demographic, or whatever that social network chooses to serve them. With podcasting, they've actually gone and searched for the creator, usually themselves, or they've discovered them from another platform. They've put them through their own internal filter, and then they've decided, I'm going to listen to this person speak. I get my news from podcasting. I didn't used to. Maybe only this year I've started. Every morning I listen to the Times, like Daily Digest, and it's just the best curation I've had for news. And I think about, why is that? Well, it's years of deciding which publication I want to read my news from, and for some reason the Times has always stood out to me as fairly neutral and fairly accurate and high quality, and I've gone and seeked their platform out. In the past, I'm getting news from Twitter and Facebook without any control of who's giving it to me. And so I think it's this, it's the death of the algorithm with podcasting, which I think has meant that by definition, young people trust it more because they're making the choices.
I think that's an incredibly powerful point about choice. We are actually, more and more of our lives is being curated around us based on an algorithm deciding what it believes to be relevant to us. Yet you're right. When you make a commitment to a podcaster, you've made a choice. And that seems to be a rare thing today. Interesting. I agree with everything you said, other than the Times is central, very left. Not a bad thing, but that's the one point I go, Catty, come on.
Is it? I don't know. I just added to the podcast. I don't read it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There is a broader point though about echo chambers as well. If we can accept that podcasting doesn't have the social graph or the network underpinning it, so we have more choice. You could say the same maybe for newsletters.
Yep.
There'll be spaces that you can occupy that are even things like Discord servers and Telegram groups. There are spaces online that seem to be less curated, and it's a choice for us, and arguably they're going to be trusted spaces.
Yep.
Cool. Did you see the AI avatar of Kendall Jenner? Wasn't actually Kendall Jenner, but it was an avatar of her and her likeness by Meta, and it was incredible. And I mean, like, it was the first time you look at one of these and go, wow, we are living in the future. What do you think the role of AI avatars is in marketing and branding more generally?
I think the obvious one is cheaper production, being able to work with creators without having to be in the room with them is really interesting. But also creators and influencers being able to scale their influence now at a very fast rate. So they can have, they can now contract 10, 20 makeup brands, do Instagram stories for all of them without ever having to lift their finger. And, I don't know how this plays out, but I think we're going to enter a world where creators are selling their likeness as opposed to their time and their real, actual selves. I think that's like the number one thing I could see happening.
I think in the near term, that's less likely because from what I understand, the Kendall Jenner, Mr. Beast did a similar one. To get that level of outcome and that likeness and reality meant them going to a studio, and the expense involved meant it probably wasn't accessible for most. And the current capabilities are deliberately narrow to not cause confusion and to avoid risk. There is inherent risk in scaling a person that you don't have control over. So if we think of current state, I think it's going to be on the emerging fringe for the next 2 years where some brands may do it. Long term, though, I 100% agree with you. I don't see a world where Ronaldo, Messi, LeBron are ever going to a studio when they can just use their AI avatar, their likeness. You as a company can plug in to an API that gets all the data required to be able to deliver them in that advert. I don't see a world. So scale becomes an issue. It almost creates a new form of, I think there needs to be new protections written into law to protect likeness in a way that the current law isn't sufficient, if you think of that. When Barbie came out and everyone was doing bootleg Barbies, Mattel were deliberately not pursuing legal action because they were encouraging co-creation. But I've got to imagine a future state where you're trying to protect your IP and people are using your likeness. That now has to be protected in a way that maybe it currently isn't, or the protections aren't sufficient. And then where I think it gets really interesting is the scale piece. I don't know if scale is a good thing, right? When every brand in the world can work with Kim Kardashian, every makeup brand, they're all going to work with Kim Kardashian, and it kind of loses what made it special. So I've got to assume that there will be gaps in these sort of transitionary periods of technology. There's almost these like deal arbitrage where certain people will make crazy amounts of wealth off the back of taking advantage, and then we'll probably end up in a state of that maybe resembles how we behave with creators today. They put a huge premium on their using their API for their likeness. But it is fascinating technology, and I think for marketeers, you should 100% pay attention. And if you work for a big brand, I think in the next few years, this arena is going to get very interesting.
Yeah, I think, and the final thing I'll say is, this is more of a Black Mirror dystopian take, not necessarily to marketing.
Give me it.
But what I think this is probably hinting at is the ability to create these AI likenesses for everyone, right? Where, families have their AI grandmother who they're not, they live miles away from in their room as that kind of, to fill in for their presence. And I think we start to get into some really dark territory where, people are using this to get over grief. And, there are some really interesting implications for personhood and the continuation of personhood. And that's the first thing I thought when I saw this Kendall Jenner thing. I was like, just wait till Facebook scale this to everyone, and then we're going to get some real messy situations. Who knows? Who knows how it plays out?
you're describing the singularity, and there is something deeply disturbing about that world you're painting, right? There is a company actually that I came across, and they preserve your story in a podcast form. And you do it with your loved ones. So you have a conversation, and it's meant to be an archive for you to pass on to your grandchildren, or, that speaks about your life, your story, what you love. And it's this really rich, intimate format. And I thought there was something very beautiful about that. But in the same sentence, my mind went to a future state and went, that could get really dangerous. I think the world's going to get really... We're going to go through some really strong moral dilemmas with these types of technologies. I think the sex industry is going to explode in a way and propagate the challenges that society has around relationships and those things. But God, well,
that's for another podcast.
Yeah, another podcast. Just give me the Ray-Bans that I can wear indoors and film shit. I don't need the other stuff. We may go too far. Just give me that. Okay, my man. To finish up, let's have a debate of the week. I want to ask you, and pick a side, give me a take. But the debate of the week is context and framing matters more than the content itself. True or false?
True.
Explain.
I need to think about it. I don't think I have to frame this.
Okay, do you want me to give you my take?
It's such a broad question. Yeah, what's your take?
Well, anytime I present you with a yes or no answer, it's inherently flawed, right? Generally, because there is usually nuance. Context and framing, to me, is an exceptional amplifier, positive or negative, to a message. I'll give you an example. One of my favorite ads of all time was a billboard, and it was outside an apartment block on a big new build. And it basically said, if you were here, if you lived here, you would be home by now. In isolation, means very little. The context and framing was, it was bang outside one of the worst, most congested areas for traffic, where the mindset of the person looking at that billboard was one of frustration. You were sat there. So, simply a message that if it was void of context or didn't have the correct framing, probably wouldn't have worked. However, it was tremendously effective because of that. The same can be said for negative context. If I place an ad and I'm talking, and contextually that ad is placed, I'm an oil company or an airline, and I'm placed within a ESG, sustainable, save the environment article, that's terrible context and framing, which is going to amplify the negativity or inherent negativity or contradiction that would exist between the two industries, right? So I think context and framing is an amplifier, neither good or bad. That's my take.
Yeah, I feel like it's very difficult to have a great piece of content really hit without the right context and framing.
Yeah.
Which is why I said it's true. So like, even if you think of all the great Nike ads or all the great, emotive marketing that really made you feel something, there's usually some kind of real world event, some kind of moment in time, some kind of cultural context which is occurring at the same time, which, like you said, just amplifies that moment beyond what the content ever could have done. And I think advertising is just that. It's like, it's attaching itself to moments in our time, moments in our culture, and without that context, I think usually these ads fall flat.
Amen.
The content has to hit as well, though.
Yeah, that's why I say an amplifier, positive or negatively. I think it's a multiplier of whatever you intend to do. Okay, dude, great speaking with you. Next time I will be back in the UK with a microphone, so I hope this turned out okay. But until next time.
Peace.